Today, on behalf of GEFNA Managers Forum, I am welcoming everybody. Today, we are going to have a discussion about role of micro, small, and medium enterprises to contribute towards national economic growth. Our guest speaker is Rajendra Tyagaraja, former, everybody know about him. I don't want to give more detail about him. He's former Chief Executive Officer of Hatton National Bank and then NDB and Cargill Bank. I got a very two pages of his CV, but everybody that I don't want to take much time on these things. Now the SME is a very important topic in the present context. So before taking much time, we will straightly go to his presentation now. This session will be 45 minutes for his presentation, and then again 1 hour we will have a discussion. Right, this is over to
Thank you very much, Dr. Sivakumaran. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time to log in. It's indeed a pleasure, and I'm actually speaking from Jaffna. I'm actually at the moment in Jaffna. What I would request for those who are not speaking is for best clarity, to mute your video as well as audio, and then during question time, you can certainly unmute. We'll probably get a better quality from everybody else. What I'm going to do today is to speak on a subject which I'm sure touches the heart and mind of most of us who have some connection with the North. But it's a problem or an opportunity not only for those from the North. It's an opportunity for literally, I would say, 30% of people who are engaged in business in Sri Lanka in the micro and SME space. So before I get into the real context of micro, SME, and their pain points, and then to look at some of the opportunities, I think especially for our colleagues who have dialed in from overseas, it's good to give a brief snapshot of where the country from an economic point of view is today, because we hear a lot of mixed messages about the status of the economy. So what I'd like to do is, without having any biasness, to pinpoint some of the key pain points from an economic, national economic point of view, and then try to give a perspective as to why we are currently having this particular issue. And then with that perspective to move into the SME and the micro sector. So if we really look at the Sri Lankan economy itself, it's approximately a $80 billion economy. And to date, the country, like most developing countries, has grown over decades, having debt as part of a growth tool. And that is Sri Lanka is not a stranger to that post-independence. The issue which we are currently probably facing is, starting from April 2019, we first had those attacks on the country, and then rapidly early 2020, we saw the influx or the birth of COVID-19, which sort of slowly came into the country and then really accelerated in 2021. So in that context, we had not double whammy, but a triple whammy from tourism, inward remittances, and exports. Tourism, which used to account for almost 13% of our gross domestic product, literally we had over $4.5 billion coming in 2019, trickled to almost zero in 2020 and 21. We had 1.9 million tourists coming in 2019. For the first 4 months of 2021, we had 3,000 tourists. So that puts things into context as to how things slowed down due to a pandemic. I mean, none of us can really predict a pandemic. At the same time, with global challenges in some of the markets where our Sri Lankans were living and working, not the permanent folks, but some of the short-term contract workers. With those countries also showing some difficulties, the inward remittance flow in the country also slowed. And also with COVID, most of the mature markets were also busy realigning their own internal consumptions and getting their own act together with working from home and social mobility restrictions. Exports mainly in the apparel sector, which is one of our flagships, certainly slowed down, and also tea exports. These are two big products which were our flag bearers, slowed down. And another contributing factor in Sri Lanka was, given the excessive amount of lockdowns, and with all good intentions, there was lockdowns and social mobility restrictions, which also slowed down factories and productivity. So in that sort of context, the current account deficit also started to increase, and obviously that put additional pressure on the country's balance of payments and reserves. Now, in that context, we, as at today, have around $35 billion of what we call external debt, which is mainly funded by international sovereign bonds. And the first of them, which was due in July this year for $1 billion, was settled by the country, which was expected and factored by the markets. The issue is, over the next 5 years, we have approximately between $4 to $5 billion of these ISBs due for settlement, which is naturally a challenge, especially if tourism does not pick up, because that $4 or $5 billion of inflow from tourism was a very important stopgap to mainly offset the repayment of some of these bonds. So in that context, that today we are seeing what most of you will be hearing about, the scarcity in the forex market. And that is a reality. That is definitely a reality. But saying that, I think it's also good for most of us who are not involved in financial services to take a slight pause back and look at the composition of debt, which has significantly changed over the last perhaps 3 decades. In 1989, our external debt to GDP was as high as 62%. But there, literally, only 2.5% around 2004 was commercial borrowings. Literally everything was a concessional loan, which was borrowed at rates around 1%, and with repayment periods ranging from as low as 25 years to as high as 40 years. So very long extended repayment periods with very, very low concessional rates, because Sri Lanka was categorized as a low-income country. But as you and I both know, as time progressed, from the mid-2000s, the country, when the per capita started to hit $4,000, we lost that status as a low-income country and went into the middle-income category. And when that happened, the concessional loans started to slow down into a trickle because the eligibility criteria went down. So actually from about 2007, the country, like most developed markets, started to take debt from a commercial basis, raising money in the international capital markets. So what you see today is ISBs, mainly ISBs, but at much shorter periods, mainly 5 years of repayment at rates around 6.5%. So the profile of debt, the maturity period of debt, and the cost of debt has significantly changed in the last 2 to 3 decades, mainly also because of our economic progress. Of course, with the end of the conflict in 2009, there was initially a massive investment program on infrastructure, mainly rebuilding parts of the country which were destroyed, as well as a heavy investment in roads connecting the country, which also contributed to GDP growth. But unfortunately, that growth came from infrastructure and not from a sustainable income generating capability. And I guess what was country was expecting over another 5-6 years, probably in the mid to late 2000s, the last 5 years, for the country to pick up. That's why when the previous government negotiated the GSP Plus program for 5 or 7 years, it was to give the country a breathing space to retool its manufacturing capability, its value-added export capability, so that they improve their competitiveness to really compete in the free market on a commercial basis. But unfortunately, with what happened from 2019, that whole journey has now taken an extended period. So we are facing a situation which was probably not planned or anticipated by any policymaker. And that is a reality. So in that context, in the context of such a pressure, let's look at where we are from a SME perspective. Now, Sri Lanka is no different to the rest of Asia. Effectively, Asia accounts for approximately or 90% of businesses in Asia are SME-centric. And this SME sector accounts for approximately 50% of the workforce in Asia. And Sri Lanka is no different. The only difference, I would say, significant difference, is technology appears to have embraced the micro and SME space much faster and much more positively in other parts of Asia than Sri Lanka. For example, today, around 44 to 45% of all payments which flow through Asian SMEs are contactless payments, digital payments. But for those who live and work and do business in Sri Lanka, we know that it's pretty much a cash-based society, and the digital element is still very minimal. So while that is a challenge, it's also a huge opportunity for this particular industry segment to embrace technology, to embrace digitalization, improve productivity, and the same process to increase and grow. So that's one area I want to touch. The importance of technology from a payments point of view, from a paperless point of view, from a data point of view, and very importantly, based on data-driven decision-making. Because that is something I feel, and having lived, worked, and done business here for the last 30 years, I think Sri Lanka is still very, very short in adopting data-driven decision-making, whether it's SME or large scale. But that's also very much an opportunity. The next area is, I know, especially for our friends who are connecting from overseas, who have a lot of connection and affiliation with back home, technology, tech startups, and interesting tech-based businesses has been a fairly big thing in the last few years. But let us not forget that Sri Lanka is a small island with 20 million people, and literally 3 in 10 people among our population have some connection with agriculture. You know, we are blessed with green gold, agriculture. And unfortunately, while 30% of our population are connected to agriculture, the productivity of agriculture only contributes less than 8%. Actually, it's now down to 7.5% of the country's GDP. So it shows a significant weakness in terms of the productivity aspect of this sector. But the way I look at it is that weakness also is the sector's biggest possible opportunity to look upside, especially for all of you who have connected either locally as academics, banks, bankers, professionals, or those from overseas who have an interest in Sri Lanka to try and understand this whole system, technology, agriculture, and the opportunity for agri-modernization, not just to grow primary produce, but to grow what the market wants and not to grow what we grow from a perspective of what I call herd mentality. We are very good at following the herd. And that's where this data and data-driven decision making is very important. Now, let me, in that perspective, speak about what I call supply chain. Because when you speak to a typical micro business or SME business, some of the common things which come out is we have no access to banking. We have no access to cheap funding. There is no market. We don't know where to go and market. We don't have the technical ability to meet compliance requirements. And also, with no disrespect to anyone who has logged in, one of the other pain points which I see is very often it's people like you and I also play a contributory role to some of these pain points of this industry, especially when we bring in our emotional attachment, wanting because of sympathy or attachment to back home, we want to back a small timer. So we say, okay, here is $1,000 or $10,000 or something. Grow something, grow Burunga, grow Alavira, and send it out, we'll buy. But in that process, my question is, do we look at the guy's ability locally to produce what we ask consistently, to produce it to a set of quality which is expected from a market, to produce it at a cost which we think is sustainable? Is it produced and packaged using material which is environmentally friendly? Is there a good understanding of compliance in entry requirements into various markets, especially when it comes to food-related exports? Are we conscious of those things? I think sometimes we are not. And then what happens is these guys get excited, they grow, and then they end up being disappointed when their produce gets rejected because they are not ready. So I think one of the biggest learning exercises and an opportunity for us is, as much as we are affiliated and we love our brothers and sisters locally, first help them to develop an enterprise and scale it up locally. Test the 20 million people, test that market locally. Only with those learnings do you then nurture them as to how they can scale up beyond the shores of Sri Lanka into other markets. And that, I think, is a very, very important thing, because a number of these pain points then get addressed. And frankly, another issue which most of these people involved in agriculture or some of these sectors expect is government subsidy and government protection. And I think without getting into politics, my personal request is, advice is, stay away from politics, stay away from government handouts, build a model and build a supply chain which can stand its own. And to do that, and if the supply chain is properly followed, any bank or any financier will finance based on cash flow if that model is right. I'm going to I'll touch on a few technology-related opportunities a bit later, but I'm going to take the opportunity of sharing 2-3 mini case studies with a particular reason for you. to highlight a couple of cross-cultural pain points which have been arrested and addressed in these cases. The first one I'm going to talk about is most of you may have read in the social media or press of a company which is called Mars Tropical Food Processing, MAS Tropical Food Processing, through its northern business. It just won the United Nations Food System Summit Best SME Award. It came in the social media and media about 2 weeks ago. Now, this company is been in business for at least 30 years. I know the founders very well. Colombo-based people, they have a massive processing factory in Dambulla. But what they did is, a few years ago, they initially started collecting fresh milk by getting into an abandoned little dairy in Kilinochchi. They started there collecting fresh milk, and then they started to produce sterilized milk in Kilinochchi. Then they slowly got used to connecting with the local farmers in the Vanni, built up a milk chain, a good milk chain, and then they saw the opportunity. In addition to milk, there was multiple opportunities in agri processing. So these guys are very strong in spices and spice-related exports into Europe and other markets, including the UK. So they identified, in addition to the cheese, sesame oil and milk which they make for the local market, they found an opportunity to process and produce and export peanut butter, which most of you abroad are familiar with, which is a very high impact nutrient. And they found a very strong buyer in Germany. So what they have now done is they have set up from the Kilinochchi dairy, they moved into Pale, or actually to Iyakkachi. At the Iyakkachi junction, they, about 2.5 years ago, when they were looking for land, there was a family from the north thinking of emigrating overseas. And this land was literally jungle. It was overgrown shrubs. And I think the owners got to know that Mars was looking to set up a local supply chain of cooperative outgrowers. And in their wisdom and goodness, that family contacted Mars and said, we are happy that you all are coming. If you all are going to invest in the region, we will give you our land. So these guys were very happy. They took the land, they cleared the land, and they said they will take care of the land and make the best use of it. And today, at the junction of Iyakkachi, they set up this fully integrated processing plant. And they have as much as 400 outgrowers in that Pale Iyakkachi belt who are growing peanuts on one side. They are also having 2-3 cows to produce fresh milk. There is a collection process in that process. And today, the other important point I want to mention is, when we speak about, sometimes we have this issue on ethnicity and secularism. The factory manager in Iyakkachi is a guy from Batiklo, from the east, who is a graduate from China, but has come to the north. So there is no issue there. The guys looked at the bigger picture. They looked at the market, the ability to produce, and they picked the best brains to do so and set up a community. And today they are exporting to Germany. They export to one of the largest supermarket chains. But the other point I want to make here is, now, if somebody with a local farming chain, supply chain, had tried to go into Germany, they would have failed immediately. Because one thing we did not realize, even Mars did not realize, is the peanuts in Sri Lanka, especially the Vanni, appear to have a fairly high percentage of a type of negative micronutrient, which the percentage is well above the maximum permitted level from an EU perspective for that product to be accepted into the EU. So that was the first hurdle they faced. They have an order book as much as 50,000 jars for a year, but at this moment in time, they can only produce 1,500 jars from these 400 farmers. So you can see the huge opportunity. The second point I'm trying to make is when they face that problem regarding the compliance issue with the quality, because they were Ma, which was a major supply chain provider with a very strong German buyer, the German buyer came out and said, okay, you have a supply chain, it's the North, we'd like to help you. Let us negotiate and arrange for a grant from the European Union, which was targeting research to be done in Yekkachi with those farmers to start working towards reducing that content of nutrients, that particular type of nutrient in the peanut, so that they actually get back into the compliance process to improve the market accessibility to the EU. So the point I'm trying to make is the fact that the supply chain, starting with small time outgrowers, has successfully connected with a mid to large time player outside the northern province in the mainstream Sri Lankan business circle, tried and tested exporter with strong buyers, had that full connectivity to a supply chain, full supply chain, to bring in solutions to the pain points which started at the lower end of the origins of the supply chain. And that is something very important to make sure that disappointments are arrested. So that is one thing I would like to share as a positive thing. The same guy tells me, and this is something very important, from time to time we hear, it's not only in the north, south, various places, people come into the market and say, I want to buy murunga, or I want to import, I don't know, chilies, but I want it from Jaffna, or I want it from East, or I want it from God knows where. Without realizing whether it's you or me, today our children who are living and working and doing whatever it is in Europe or Australia or Canada, when they eat a KFC chicken or when they eat a Big Mac, McDonald's, the gherkin, I don't think they check whether it comes from Kerala or Spain or whether it comes from Punerian. They eat a McDonald's, right? It's white label. So I think the point is to look at the bigger picture and try to facilitate the micro and SME supply chain throughout Sri Lanka without trying to confine it to a particular zone or based on our ethnic preference. I'm just trying to be open here because these are pain points which we are going to address. So the same guy, the same Mars, I got the permission from Mr. Mario D. Alvis, who is the founder, chairman of the company this morning, that I'm going to speak about this, and I have his full blessings to talk about this. The same way he is doing peanut butter with the northern farmers. By the way, it goes under the brand New Beginnings. It's a very nice thinking, new beginnings for those in the north, the farming community. So I'm very happy with this guy. He has a similar supply chain out of Hakwana in the Mathura district, producing coconut-based products, coconut milk, coconut powder, various products, high value added, which goes to again one of the largest supermarket chains in Germany. And they get paid a premium for every kilogram of coconut powder which they extract because of that quality. Now, he was telling me over the last 3 years, what those guys have done, that entire supply chain in that village in Happana, they have got together with Mars and the German buyer. And they have, like a cooperative, they have set up a fund, a progressive fund, where they have been contributing a part of every one of the kilos they have been exporting through Mars, through that supply chain, into a fund which goes to equip literally every household of those farmers, the rooftops, into rooftop solar. So the coconut farmer now has become a solar power generator, supplying to the national grid, getting an additional source of income, and also probably going into net zeroing in terms of his electricity bill. So just see how the value chain has worked. And this guy was telling me that last year they identified the local village school needed upgrading into technology. Now this supply chain, the entire cashiering network in Germany got energized just before COVID, and they collected 23,000 euro amongst them, the entire network of German cashiers, and they sent a delegation of cashiers to Sri Lanka, to Matara, and the volunteers actually got together with the locals with that 23,000 euro and rebuilt the school. Now just see how the supply chain has become so strong in terms of bonding from the buyer to the Sri Lankan exporter, through the exporter into the local supply, end-to-end supply chain, and solidified it. So just imagine whether there is a COVID or a cyclone, the bondage between the end consumer, the end distributor and the originator is so strong that they're not going to go away in a hurry. So that's a very important point I would like to stress. It is called the importance of trust, building a trust in a supply chain, very often which is not understood or not followed. The other point I would like to say is we keep on speaking about opportunities in the Valley and the North, very often not knowing what we should grow. I'll come to that in a moment. But today, this morning I was driving on the A9, I realized, because this guy said it's Yekkachi, as I passed Yekkachi and got into Pale, I was looking at this whole, on the left-hand side, this whole ecosystem of young coconut plants. There was this big plantation with the Coconut Development Authority. I think it's a nursery. But then when I made a couple of phone calls, I was told that the government had distributed almost 3.5 million young coconut saplings in the last couple of years to people in that area. And even though the coconuts in size in that area are much smaller than the coconuts in maybe the coconut triangle, the extract, whether it's milk or powder or whatever it is highly important and valuable to any coconut related supply chain. So this is an opportunity I'd like to share for anybody who is connected with the SME or MSME segment, for something to look forward in the future. The other important point, very often we miss out in this micro SME spaces. We get a bright idea, we say we grow, we'll connect these farmers. But the next question is, do we grow in sufficient large quantities to attract the buyer from Colombo or any town to send good logistics, cost-effective, productive logistics, to send the stuff back into the warehouse or to a point of export? Now, this is something I learned from my last 15 or 20 years in banking in Sri Lanka. I have actually done this. I think some of my ex-colleagues are also on this call. I will name the village also. There is a village in Polonnaruwa district called Giridamana. This is a very much a Mahavali System C smallholder community. Each guy was given quarter acre or half an acre of paddy, and very often that paddy was a loss making. Literally, when we first went in there with that particular bank which I was running, was making a loss, and everyone was waiting for the subsidy. So one of our microfinance team leaders went there with a very good insight with one of our mid-market relationship officers, and they got this idea because of the quality of soil that you can grow things like anthuriums and bougainvilleas as a home garden. So they started with, there were about 185 families in that particular village. So they started with about 10, 15 families, and they grew these home gardens, very good quality flowers, but we could never attract a Lassana Flora or Shirohana to send a lorry to Giridhamana, because these guys were not growing in sufficient quantity for the buyer to want to send his transport. So what we then did is, we said, let's get on to this concept of one village, one product. While the base was paddy, over about 2 years, the finance team, the microfinance team, got the entire village of 185 or so engaged into the home garden industry, that over about 2-3 years, when I actually had the opportunity of visiting that village, every household had 1/4 to half an acre of either anthuriums or bougainvillea, and the same Lastana Flora or Shirohana were now sending their lorries twice a week. And guess where these cut flowers were going? Direct to Amsterdam, to the flower market. So, and I can tell you, 3 years when they started this project, literally the entire village was literally imprisoned, indebted to the main Khade Mudalali in the village. Because that guy used to be the unofficial banker. He used to give an advance against the paddy and then imprison these people in debt for the entire year. But in 3 years, when we went there, I noticed every house had a 3-wheeler. We may have seen about a half a dozen Nissans, and we saw, I think, 2 or 3 Bolero double cabs. These are the guys who went up the value chain doing successful farming. So it is a very good example of how cluster farming, community farming, farming to order, growing to market makes sense if you connect with the right sort of value chain. So it's our supply chain, which I think is again a very, very important thing. And I can tell you from experience that none of the 185 guys to whom that particular bank which I ran extended credit was based on collateral or security. It was based entirely on 2 things: grow to market and the produce, and of course we took a suitable agri insurance cover for crop protection. But other than that, the usual complaint, no security, can't these banks are asking, was taken away, because we found the right supply chain, we found the right advice as to what to grow to market, worked with them, got the right supply chain, got the right logistics, make sure it went on time, and the cash came to the bank. Recovery rate was literally 95-98%. So it's something I'd like to share. Then let's get on to things like the use of data and data-driven decision making. We are told we have around 1.2 million farmers in this country. Most of them are growing paddy. My question is, and very often, they are grumbling. They are grumbling because they are not getting the right fertilizer. Now, every day in papers, you hear the story about no fertilizer. That's point 1. But even before you get that, the complaint is we are not getting a fair price. There is no market. The reason behind that is there is a mismatch between the fragmented smallholders of paddy on one side and the large-scale millers who mill the paddy and convert it into rice. And these are the guys who are able to warehouse and decide how much to release to the market. So the issue is when you go into the conventional type of rice, which is what normal people, average people grow, you tend to become a prisoner into that milling cartel. But because I'm today talking to a forum of northern managers, if you look at the belt beyond Bavania, especially getting towards beyond Kilinochchi into Punarian and then getting into Jaffna, that soil is probably the most suitable in the country to grow some of the best low GI content rice like Pachaperumal, Muttakarpan rice, which is now in heavy demand in most Western markets for as a staple food for people with diabetes or sugar, as one example. The question is, are our people growing the right sort of produce to the right sort of market? And again, I think this is not happening sufficiently because we are not using data and data-driven decision making to this sort of thing. And it's very sad because again, we are very much in a, I would say, in a cocoon. We are not connecting with Colombo. Now, if we connect with Colombo, we have one of the best data repositories of whom to grow, where to grow, why we should grow, is the EDB. They may not have money today to promote exports, but they probably have one of the best data insights on the markets in all 5 continents, the buyers, what they are buying, what sort of things they need to buy, what are the compliance requirements. That information is readily available freely. So it's an opportunity for us, not to say we don't know, to connect with these people as part of a supply chain and make sure that we know what to grow. For example, in the last, that EDB, as well as there's another group called the Lanka Agripreneurs Forum. The Lanka Agripreneurs Forum is today chaired by a gentleman called Rizvi Zahid, who was probably for the last 25 years in the main board of Hades, one of the foremost guys with a national passion for agriculture. And he tells me one of the biggest supply-demand mismatches is the export demand for what we call immunity-boosting agriculture, value-added agriculture products, like Kottamalli-based, Valmi, various other things, which the world is demanding, but we are not producing. So here again, there is an opportunity for those who are trying to get into this SME and micro sector. I'm talking about agri. Use people who have the data to learn as to what should be grown, why should it be grown, for whom you should grow, and what are the requirements. Very, very important. And then today, when we speak about technology, okay, payments is one aspect, we'll touch on that later. But there are so many other technological applications which we can bring into agriculture to make agriculture modernized, more productive, and also to make the next generation of farmers wanting to be in the farm. Say, for example, today, I know that there is one business, I think these guys are from the north originally, some of them are Moratuwa graduates. They set up this agri-tech company called SenseMate. I think some of them who are on this call will know about them. They produce mobile app-based, they use sensor-based technology to infuse nutrients into the field on remote, right? Today we have, I actually, now that I am very much, I've converted into being a meat eater into more of a vegetarian. I eat a lot of green salads and food, but with COVID, I'm very concerned about the quality of normal leaves buying from a supermarket, whether they are washed, whether it's clean. Now I have found a couple of very good greenhouses and vertical farms just outside Colombo, where these guys are using agri-tech guys. Now there's a company which is run by a young, my namesake, Anishan Tyagaraja, a guy who went and studied in Sheffield, who has come back. You can go and Google him. He has a company called Honest Greens. Honest Greens. He supplies to all the big supermarkets today. In fact, he can't supply enough. Some of the best green leaves and salads, all made under greenhouse thing. He harvests based on your order. You order today, he harvests tomorrow, delivers it day after. And all the nutrients are infused using what they call Internet of Things devices, IoT devices, sensors, connecting sensors into mobile phones so that they don't have to wait 24 hours to see when the climate changes. The nutrients get activated based on the change in temperature. So that sort of technology has today come in. It is available for people to operate. But one thing I must tell you, and this has become a national pain point, some of you would have heard or seen the report which I recently submitted to the new finance minister, Basil Rajapaksa. This was sponsored by Pathfinder Foundation and Visa International. We looked at some of the main pain points focusing on agri supply chains, tourism, and fintech. And one very big thing which came out as a problem in agriculture in Sri Lanka is because the bulk of the land today is owned by smallholders. So the land is fragmented. So when the land is fragmented, the smallholders very often find it difficult to invest in new technologies like IoT or sensors or drones or whatever it is to improve their productivity in these fields. So one thing which came out of that think tank, which had about 30 diverse group of people from all over the country, was that Sri Lanka has successfully developed apparel parks. Now we have got into techno parks. Quite well we have done. Why not now experiment also with agri zones, agri parks? Why not look at starting in one province, whether it's Kurunegala or whether it's Palay, it doesn't matter. You look at a minimum of 1,000 hectares or more, where you have like what the Brandix people did in Vaisagapatnam. They became the operator with the government of Karnataka. And then once that was operated, they brought in all players to plug in and play in that system. So one opportunity is we are now talking to the government and saying, why don't you sponsor for a start one large agri zone? It doesn't matter whether it's north, south, east or west or the center. And within that, invite one or major player who has the ability to be an operator. So you set up the infrastructure, bring in some of these agri-tech players like SenseMate. There are other guys who are operating drones, because that drone, whether it is spraying weedicide or whether it is plucking chilies, it doesn't matter. For a farmer, you can't use it for 24 hours. You may use it for 2-3 hours a day. But if you are in an agri zone where you have 100 farmers, small scale guys, the deployment of the device can also be literally fully utilized. And the small scale farmer could also get the benefit of the device or the technology at a much more affordable cost, because you can offer it as a SaaS, software as a service or a device as a service. So there is an opportunity for operators, for growers, technology providers, all to come in this sort of a agri zone. And this is one policy reform which we have now submitted which I am sure will be taken seriously, because if the government could have given birth to tech zones following the success of apparel zones, I see no reason why they can't do that with agri zones now that they have recognized this pain point. So that's a point I'd like to share with you. And today we don't have to, with all due respect, only look at overseas for technology. This technology, we have some of the best brains, whether it is Moratuwa, whether it is Colombo, whether it is in our own Aravial Nahar, south of Kilnochi, or whether it's in Jaffna, we have some of the best brains. It's about how you harness those brains and get into technology. Now, today, I was speaking to another guy, some of you may know him, Jeevan Jnanam, who has developed this incubator called Hatch. Now, he has also got into this new technology called artificial intelligence or machine learning. And they have this new smart tech company called Spectrify AI. Spectrify stands for spectrum-based technology, prism-based technology. What it does is it uses a technology called spectral analysis, which goes in from a lens, which can go into any object to separate the light and then to look at the DNA of that particular element. So what this guy has done is he has struck a deal with a major operator who is buying good quality tea to develop a particular blend of tea. Normally, when you blend tea, somebody uses a spec. Then somebody gives the order to the local broker. Then they go to the auctions and get the auctioneers to ask for a particular blend. And then what most of you would be used to is you will see these tea testers coming and looking at number of teacups with these different blends. They take the cup, drink it, gargle, and then spit, taste it. Now, one can only do that on a sample basis, and you can never ensure consistency in the quality. But with this technology, you can apply that prism-based technology across hundreds or thousands of cups, and you can identify the blend of the particular tea leaf to see what are the chemical attributes you have to actually construct the type of DNA of a tea blend literally from nothing. So this is the type of technology which is now available in Sri Lanka to actually improve your marketability and grow to market. But the point again I want to make is that cannot be done in isolation, whether you're in Hakmana in Matara, whether you're in Yektachi in the north, whether you're in Kalladi in particular, it can't be done. You have to connect with Colombo, because the center of commerce is in Colombo, where the chambers, the action is there. So, and the nucleus of supply chains are also there. So again, my urge is for those who are involved in the well-being of SME and micro is to keep an open mind to plug into the entire country and not into specific regions, because the benefit of whether it's a northern farmer, a northern entrepreneur, or south, east, or west will prosper more if the pie is large. You rather have a small percentage of a larger pie than having 100% of a zero pie. So I think that lesson is very important to share. So that's based on data. Now let's look at fintech and financial. We spoke about 44-45% of all payments in Asia of SMEs going through digital contactless basis, but Sri Lanka is still carrying this cash. So there are various reasons for that, right? But I think now, I think it's important for those who are in this space to understand that there are tools from a national point of view which are available to avoid the need for carrying cash. And even today, from a COVID point of view, cash is one of the biggest risks in terms of carrying a virus. So today, if you look at for those who understand what a QR code is, right? Today, you have two types of QR code. You have a static QR code sticker, which even a Tamilkara can stick in his cart, or a small, maybe a small guy in a supermarket or a shopping mall can have a dynamic QR code, which he can have in his mobile phone or device, depending on the type of business and volume you have that. Now, this can actually accept payments through any form of payment device, including wallets. So the need for carrying cash is now progressively being eliminated, and the central bank, through Lanka Clear, the clearinghouse system in the country, has deployed what we call a national QR standard for anyone to adopt. It's free to download. So I think it's important for the small businesses not to worry about, collecting cash, going 10, 20 kilometers to bank. And today banks are operating in limited hours with COVID. To use this technology. Then you have technologies with wallets today. If literally, we have 23, 24 million payment or mobile devices to a 21 million population. It's a very heavily mobile connected society. So payments through mobile payments is so available today, with especially for low value payments. You have this thing called CEFs, Common Electronic Funds Transfer Mechanism. We still don't see enough people making use of it. And being a banker, I do not go to a bank branch for now the last maybe 5 years. Everything is done through my mobile phone. And today, for small ticket payments, we have CEFs. Make use of it. The guy who kindly agreed to give the license for this meeting today, Johan Vijayagunawardena, who is a silent observer in this meeting, is the CEO of a fintech company in Colombo called Payables. Now, he just launched, if you Google, he launched about 2 weeks ago with MasterCard, the first soft post in this country. So that is what you call a deviceless point of sale mechanism using your mobile phone. So you now don't need to pay 100,000 rupee deposit or whatever it is to get a point of sale machine. You can actually get it at a much cheaper cost for the small businesses. Use those technologies to become smarter and be more tech savvy. One of the guys who was award winner in the Sri Lanka Angel Startup competition this year was a company called Niftron, Niftron. Niftron is run by 3 founders, 2 Tamil boys, one from Batiklo, one from Jaffna, and one of the Islamic faith from, I think, also from Batiklo. They all studied, I think, in Colombo, and couple of them went abroad to study, came back, and they got together. And today they have deployed probably what is called the first blockchain offered as a software as a service. It is available to any SME or MSME to plug and play. So if you want to get in as trust as a factor where fraud is literally eliminated, you want to have an end-to-end chain of documentation using technology called blockchain. You don't have to invest in hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital payment. You have this sort of a platform developed by our own Sri Lankan SME startup is available to you. I want to share another example of a fintech which has done very well identifying payment problems and financial inclusivity in the country. For those of you in the north and those of you who are from the north and who are now living abroad, will be very familiar with our ancient cooperative system. I think we still have thousands of cooperatives all over the country, including the north. And I don't know how many of you are aware the cooperative system is not the cooperative banks, the cooperative financial institutions are not regulated by the central bank, unfortunately. So they don't have a core banking system. Very often, the guys, I mean, they collect deposits and they are supposed to lend, but they don't very often lend. And the productivity is literally very minimal. But the people who are connected to the cooperative system have no other choice. So they have to go from depositing from 50 rupees a day to a couple of million. So these guys have seen that problem. These boys from Kuliyapitiya, they have formed a company called Nanosoft. And today he is one of the most successful fintechs. He is offering a fintech solution, again, as a software as a service, completely cloud-based. He has more than 500 cooperatives as his customers. And now, I think in 2 years, he has become cash positive. Again, identifying a problem, addressing a problem. So I think there is so much of potential in Sri Lanka for deployment of knowledge in this SME and MSME space. It's about plugging these guys and mentoring them. The final point I want to make is, again, with all due respect, I'm very happy because 2 years ago I had the opportunity of, along with my former colleague, accountancy colleague, Sherad Amalian, who is now a part of the founder group of MAS Holdings. Sherad, myself, and a guy called Rajan Anandan, who was the Google CEO of India, we were invited to present to about 150 guys in the Valley in the USA, I think 2 years ago. So Rajan dialed in from India, and Sherad and I actually went. We went with our own money. We traveled to the US because we were very keen to engage these people with good intent to show them what is available in Sri Lanka and to also share something which was happening in the north. And I think one thing which has come out of some of the stuff is there is a lot of interest in adopting and embracing people from various parts of Sri Lanka. But sometimes what seems to be happening is they are doing their own little thing directly. And sometimes when you do it with, 12-hour time difference and stuff like that, a lot of good intent, but these SMEs, and especially the small micro guys, it's not only money, they need a lot of nurturing and mentoring. It needs a lot of time, advice, looking at points. Why can't you do it this way? Why can you do it this way? So to do that, while it can be done remotely, what I want to alert and bring to your attention is there is a built-in infrastructure in Colombo. Make use of it. Now, there are at least 3 or 4 angel incubators in Sri Lanka. And what I did was I chaired the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce between 2017 and 2019. And as soon as I finished my chairmanship, I now chair the National Agenda Committee of the Ceylon Chamber for entrepreneur development. And one of the very first things we did last year, we realized that entrepreneur development is really for the upper end of SMEs, because the Ceylon Chamber has around 650, ranging from John Keel's to Nestle's to Unilever at the very top end, to the emerging Sri Lankan corporates as members. Then you have another cluster of what we call the larger SME guys who are plugged in there. Now, the whole objective of entrepreneur development is to try to connect those SME guys with the bigger boys so that the supply chain connectivity is there for them to be able to also grow to market, learn from better practices, learn how to compete in the international markets and go up. So we did that. But last year, we went a step ahead of that, not only looking at SME development, we plugged in with another guy who went to Australia, he studied in Australia, came back in 2000 to Sri Lanka, believing in Sri Lanka and has not gone back for 21 years. Prajit Balasubramaniam, who has his own startup capital company, BOE Capital. But Prajit also came to me and said, let's set up this thing called Center for Startup Council and make it a part of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. And I got approval from the board to do that. The whole reason behind that is when you look at emerging micro businesses, whether you are an agri-tech, whether you are a fintech, these guys all come with brilliant ideas, but very often the big boys don't have time for them because they always wanted to go on a tried and tested thing. So there is an opportunity to introduce these startups to the SME guys who on the other hand can't afford the big guys. But here is technology, new idea, new thinking with the startups, which can be deployed in SME, which can be a two-way win-win combination. So the Center for Startup, Council for Startups was set up towards the latter part of last year. And today we have more than 100 members connecting with the SME Sri Lanka. The point I'm trying to make is we have some of the best in brain Sri Lankan guys who are mentoring these guys. Now you have one of the co-founders of Sparsilon, Shalin Balasuriya, who sits there. You have the founder of Ensinga. Ensinga was a startup company in Sri Lanka who went and divested about 3 years ago in Singapore, multi-billion-dollar divestment. The guy still has his passion. He is now into his second startup, but he is volunteering to mentor. Then you have a guy called Gamini Saparamadu, who is probably, some of you will know him, chairman of Kent Group. Last 40, 50 years, homegrown, son of the soil, entrepreneur to the hilt, and a guy who has failed number of times, but refused to be put down and come back repeatedly and succeeded. And which is a very important attribute for any aspiring micro or SME business not to get put off with the first failure. Because a true sense of an entrepreneur is not to use the buzzword, I'm an entrepreneur. To have the courage to go through failure, fall down, learn from the mistakes and come back and bounce back. So that sort of mentoring is available in Colombo. So my request is make use of that wealth. It is available. Don't brush it off, because you need every possible dot to be connected to complete the picture if you want to get this micro SME ecosystem in Sri Lanka, whether it is in the north, south, east or west or the center, to make it work. So these are some of the points I wanted to share with you guys. It's a very diverse group of people who are plugged in. Just to say, I think we all have a passion, want to do something to these guys. But I think still we are running the danger that if most of us are operating in our own little silo trying to do. And I think what I am trying to open, hopefully some of your eyes, is there are a few platforms, the common platforms, where we can all get together and pool our knowledge, experience, resource, financial backing, whatever it is, to back these people. Now, when we speak about financial backing, I know various guys, various people, even in this forum, have in the past and probably will want to continue to put something and support people. But I want to give an example of something which I am today, the Lanka Angels Network. Now, they just launched their third fund last year, and we raised 100 million rupees at that time. Very simple philosophy. One guy could have written the check, but we took a very conscious decision. We wanted 100 investors. maximum was 1 million rupees per investor. We wanted 100 different guys. We wanted them from all over the world, from overseas and local. We wanted them from multiple backgrounds, not just for the million rupees. First thing is, we wanted people from overseas to realize there are Sri Lankans also willing to invest in this space. The second thing is, we wanted to realize every one of those guys who came in as an investor has volunteered to mentor. Now, I spent in that journey, there's a structured mentoring process. I probably in the last 3 months, I have done 5-6 mentoring sessions of 3 hours each. So I have done 15-20 hours. My time, I pick on a guy who wants my expertise. We have a one-on-one web call. There's a follow-up call. This structured platform for that is tracked. The mentee and the mentor gives feedback. If there is a overbearance from the mentor, we get to hear about it. If the mentee is not interested, he hears about it. So there is a whole process of structured process. The reason I'm saying that is some of these success stories. Now you would have, I think some of the companies now, even this Niftron guy who recently got in some money from this angel network, he went through a multiple series of interviews and mentoring programs before he got the final money. Now, Nanosoft, before he has got to where he is today, I think he has done a 3-year partnership with Lanka Angels. They sent him, I think, initially to either Germany or UK, gave him some co-banking thought process. Then they sent him to India on an accelerator program. He was funded to learn from the Indian microfinance business as to how that works, learn from some of the mistakes and the pain points, came back, was nurtured, mentored, and now he's doing. Even today, even though he has got some money from the funding, it's conditional funding because they have still seen some gaps in what he has developed today and where he could go. And that's where the mentors come in. So the point I'm trying to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is there is a structured mechanism and a framework available in Sri Lanka to join hands with you. If and when you want to join hands, it's an invitation, make use of it. It's only then, rather than operating in silos, we can all play this role to make this whole important SME MSC system to contribute truly meaningfully for Sri Lanka's progress. Not only for Sri Lanka's progress, but the individual betterment for the entrepreneur. So with those few, I think, thoughts, I think I have done about almost 1 hour and 10 minutes. I would like to pause there and hand it back to Sivakumar to moderate any questions and answers. Thank you very much for your time. Siva, over to you.
Yes. Very excellent presentation and very good eye-opening to everybody. Now the time has passed 1 hour and 15 minutes, so we will have limited time for another 45 minutes, right? So everybody, if you are asking question, please put your hand. Yes, it is good. You will be given 1 minute for your question and get done. Right. Okay. Sujan.
Yeah. So Sujan from Sydney. My question is to, it's regarding the payment gateway. So a lot of the international payment gateway, like for example, PayPal and other payment gateways are not allowed in Sri Lanka at the moment. They can accept payment, but they can't withdraw any payments. So is there any possibility for in the future to be able to have this access, so we can kind of more build on the e-commerce sector of it, where we can deal with international consumers?
So yes, to respond to that, PayPal subject, the topic has been deliberated now for a couple of years, and they had its own reasons. But from what I understand is there is a serious relook being taken for PayPal. Not only PayPal, there are a couple of equivalents, and I think the regulator is looking at it objectively. Something tells me sooner than later there will be some light at the end of the tunnel. But I think you need to also realize, Sujan, while PayPal is happening, there are a number of local solutions which are also now taking place with fintech companies, which are also integrating not only with the likes of PayPal, also with the likes of Visa, Master, and even people like Alipay and them, where they are connecting them through the national clearing system through various solutions. Now, for example, if you were listening to me about half an hour ago, I did mention about the fintech company which has just launched the first softPOS here. Now they have tied up with the MasterCard, but it's an open loop system. So it's tied up with any payment solution. It's not closed loop. So that is currently encouraged actively in the country. But I do agree for you, especially for micro payments, an equivalent of PayPal or PayPal is needed, and I think it will. My feeling is it will become a reality soon.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rajan. Sujan, I think you would have got the answer. Now, Yohayeswaran, you can, yes.
Thank you. It was a brilliant presentation. Yeah, now we are in the post-COVID, post-capital scenario, and aspiration of how to make Sri Lanka a knowledge entrepreneurial economy. 1, 2, a society-friendly or entrepreneurial economic system, and brand Sri Lanka. Why I'm bringing this is that our academia, our education system, our societal appreciation for education, entrepreneurship are not satisfactory, and we are creating a different society who is very much interested in government jobs, and the others want to leave the country. So how do we tackle all these 3 issues: a knowledge economy, entrepreneurial economy, society friendly, that is women friendly, children friendly, academy friendly society, and the third one is brand Sri Lanka? How do we get back to that before 60 period where everybody looked us up there, and we have somehow or other declined and came to the bottom maybe? Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So let me take
Yes.
reverse order. So I'll start off with academia and government jobs, right? I think all of us, with all due respect, are contributors to that. I think Dr. Shiva is in Jaffna running the computer faculty. You're involved in the IT faculty, right?
Civil engineering.
Okay. So let me tell you something. When I came 4 years ago, and I'll only highlight my experience there, but this applies across the country. When I brought in a whole cluster of guys from SLASCOM, the IT body, about four years ago, and we came and did a presentation to 800 graduates in the University of Jaffna. I don't know whether you were there, Siva. There was a lot of excitement with these young students because there were case studies given about how guys in Colombo are earning, IT as a career. But, we heard a lot of conversation after that from the students. I'm going to talk in Tamil. Excited. ஆனால் வீட்டில் போனால் அம்மா அப்பா சொல்றது engineering, medicine எல்லாட்டி bank job. But I'm going to say something which many people laugh, but that's reality. Bank எல்லாட்டி government job. So I used to ask, இல்லை இப்போ மேரி பண்ணைக்கு டவரி பண்ணுறதுக்கு government job, pension job, banks. So I listened to this very carefully. I want to say something. I did something about it. So I want to share something. So I went back to Colombo, and I was that time getting into becoming the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber, and I had a lot of access to USAID and the EU. So today, what they have started in Sri Lanka called a program called You Lead. You as in you lead is a program we started with a conversation which I initiated about 5 years ago, where they did this study on different segments, including the North, not only North, where they looked at dignity of labor and they looked at various vocations and they identified some of the pain points where the influencing which comes at the dining table, where, various influences. And I think over a period, what ULEAD has done is increase the awareness not only of students, also of parents and employers about the new vocations, the new opportunities over and above the conventional means of academia and careers to move forward. And I think, okay, it is still slow, but it is working. And the reason I'm saying that, I think it's yoga, right? I want to share something with you. Now that I retired from banking, in the 4 or 5 things I do, I'd share a Institute of Higher Learning. I'd share a college called British College of Applied Sciences, BCAS. It works with 3 UK universities. It does all the state-of-the-art science. But yesterday, I was on a conversation with the head of International Academic Affairs, looking at one new vocation. You know what that is? It was a degree in caregiving, because you have 60,000 care homes in the UK, and there's a huge supply-demand mismatch for care homes. And we felt that's a huge opportunity to increase the capacity of para-nurses or nursing into a very high opportunity, as an example. But there should be no shame, like whether you are working in a hotel reception as a receptionist or as a nurse, because where you come from, there is dignity. So it's about how you instill that dignity. That is up to every one of us to make sure that we give that recognition and do so. But when we speak about people going abroad, all I can tell you, my friend, is they say, no, the grass is always green on the other side, right? So I want to say something. I having lived and worked, I used to work for JP Morgan in the UK. And I had a 6-figure salary in 1992. I saw the grass being green on this side. And I came back at 35. So, it takes 5 fingers, 5 fingers, each finger is different. And I don't think any of us should pass judgment on the 5 fingers. If each of us does our part, every story will become replicated, it becomes a success story, and eventually it will come. So I think as far as we believe in Sri Lanka and we do our part individually, collectively, brand Sri Lanka will come. You will have challenges. And my belief, I came back as an expat initially for 4 years, working for a French bank here. Now I have stuck here for 30 years, right? I am a dual national, but I will not go back to England. I love living here, right? Because I believe in Sri Lanka. But the point I'm trying to make is all 5 fingers are not alike. You have to look at your own circumstances. If it makes sense to you, eventually the aggregation will build brand Sri Lanka.
Yes, good. I think I just want to give that University of Jaffna, we are having a business linkage, university business linkage. Through UBL, we are also interacting with industry people on this type of things. Right, now it is over to Johan Arulaya to ask. Yes, Johan Arulaya, yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Thea, for your interesting talk. I just want to pick up quickly on some of the points you made. We have a problem. We celebrate and we support mediocrity. As you said earlier, we throw a few $1,000s at small businesses that only survive on life support. And we throw money financing training in English, IT, soft skills. That's not good enough to be worthwhile and is actually therefore a waste of time and money. As Thea himself said, we shouldn't be trying to sell what we make. We should be making what we can sell. And for exports, us in the North, our USP, our unique selling point, is the Tamil diaspora. The diaspora know they've grown up, built careers and businesses around the world. Canada, New York, London, Malaysia, Melbourne, they know what the market wants and they know how it has to be made. As Thea said, our northern businesses need more than money. They need a lot of mentoring and nurturing. And this can't be done by talking to them once every month over Zoom or even once every week. but needs to be done every day. I've seen examples of this in Jaffna. For those of you who don't know me, I've been based in Jaffna for the last 6 years. So I've seen examples, BBK, Anand and Arnold, who's based in London, set up an accountancy and back office processing firm in Jaffna, Dadanya and Kilinochchi. VSS, Sugandhan Shanmuganathan, who came back from Toronto and now lives in Jaffna, producing food and drink and exporting it around the world. Shakti Agro, Raj Janan, who had built a career in New York. He set up a company that's producing cocoa peat, getting his coconut husks from outgrowers. Another very recent operator, Oscar Pos, set up by Kurt Kurtzing in Perth, who set up a back office here for his point of sale system. All of these guys understand what the customers want. So my question to Thea is, how do we get more people like this? Our problems in Jaffna are different to our problems in Colombo, because we're at an earlier stage. I worked in Colombo in the 90s. Jaffna today reminds me of the Colombo 30 years ago. So how do we get more people like Anand Arnold and Sugandhan, Janan and Kurt? How do we get more of the diaspora to set up and integrate the supply chain from Jaffna in the north out around the world? How do we get them to come?
So I have two, three thoughts. Jehan. The first one is each of those guys who have already come here and made it work for them is himself an ambassador. Right? For example, Ani Arnold, I know what he has done. BBK, the reason I'm saying is, I have a girl who was with me at Cargill's Bank. Right? She was getting $100,000 qualified ACCA, right, from Vavania. But, with the mother COVID issues, right, she had no choice. She came to Colombo to get a job, trained at KPMG. But now she went back and she wanted to spend time with the mother. And BBK found a slot for her with her skills, ACCA. She's getting almost double what she was getting in Colombo back there, but she is in Vavania. She is contributing to the economy of Vavania. I see the more and more we get people in the north or the Vanney or the east, wherever it is, to create and retain. There's no point in coming to Colombo. Then we have lost the plot. We need to get them to be in their own homeland and create. So the success stories, repetitive, is very, very important. Point one. The second thing is, some of these guys, I have done this, and I'm sure many others have done this. There are various fora which takes place. For one, I was invited, I think in 2017 by CTT, I think it's called CTTC, the Canadian Tamil Chamber of Commerce. I went as the keynote speaker at the annual gala and addressed, I think there were about 850. I didn't go there. It's still on, you can go and Google it. I didn't speak about charity and hand-holding and God knows what. I said hand-holding and access to markets. And I know as a result of that speech, I would have had a good half a dozen guys who connected with me. And today they have connected with businesses here. These are guys, not guys in their 60s. These are, some of them are successful UFT guys, Waterloo UFT guys in their 30s. And suddenly they saw something else and said, we never thought of this. So, it's about different fora and opportunities where you replicate the success story for people to listen and then learn more. And thirdly, as I said, Colombo has that repository. Now, I keep on mentioning about the Lanka Angels Network or Hatch. The success stories across the country are digitized and it's available. And it's available for people to find out the exact test case even before you wet your feet in water. So make use of that sort of information and knowledge base, even if you have doubts. I think there are 3-4 different ways to do that. This is, as you quite rightly said, not a short-term fix. One needs to have a reasonably medium to long-term passion for this. But it's not just for the love. And I just wanted, because you said, I want to touch on one point you said, without being disrespectful to anybody in the audience. This thing about emotional touch and giving the $1,000, I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but it is an e-commerce business. It was a winner of a particular award in the North, and very smart, vibrant young person in the 20s did something, right? It's a packaging solution, packaging for food or anything. And today there's an IPG payment gateway in the World Wide Web. And I wanted to test this person, and for the last single Tamil New Year, when I was giving some sweetmeats in Colombo, I wanted to order from this person that particular package. So I said, send me an order, and this person sent it through the local courier service. So I got what I wanted, and there was one particular box. The person charged me $600 or $800 for that box. So it might have been $3 or I don't know, €2.5. But the point I'm trying to make you was the total value of the sweetmeats I put in there would have been $250, right? But I you didn't listen to this. Now, then I went back to the person and said, how are you pricing this like this? And the person said, e-commerce செய்கிறேன், எனக்கு நல்ல ஆர்டர்ஸ் வருது, ஜெர்மனில வருது, நெதர்லாந்து வருது, அண்ணா மேர் அக்கா மேர் காசு அனுப்பினார். So this Anna Mer, Akka Mer, maybe it doesn't matter, €2, €3, they are maybe sympathy and they're sending the orders, but they're killing that person. They're killing that person's scalability, because that person is taking absolute cover on somebody's emotions, and that business will not stay off, right? So it's very, very important that if we are nurturing and supporting somebody, don't give a handout like that. Find out what makes that person to succeed and make that person strong and be competitive. Is absolutely important. I hope I clarified that point.
Thank you. That was useful. I mean, one thing I found in the North, if I may just take 30 seconds, is part of the mentoring is to change the attitude of the people here. So to change their thirst to succeed when so many of them are apathetic. But I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. Now, there is one question in the chat. Mahalingaswam has asked something. Can you answer that?
Oh, yoga. Is it yoga?
Yeah, Mahalingaswam. Yeah, yoga. Right. Yes.
That is yoga.
Can you read the question out to me? Is it on chat?
Yes, it is on chat. Yeah.
Just let me try and see. Aspiration of rebuilding that knowledge entrepreneurial society with active transformational agenda working across people.
No, before that.
That is done.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it about blockchain?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, yoga. I thought you may have not been at the audience at that time. I gave an example of what's happening in Sri Lanka with blockchain now. Even at the micro space, we have just got the first startup which has rolled out its blockchain-based platform on a SaaS basis, Nifron, right? Developed by our own guys. That's a classic example of a solution available for anybody, any industry who wants to get into using blockchain as a technology, but without having to invest into capital, you go on a pay-as-you-go basis. So that's a very good example of a small-scale businesses platform. But in addition to that, now there are a number of larger operators also building blockchain based solutions coming into the country, including some fintechs and edutechs in Sri Lanka itself. The banking and financial sector is one sector which is using this now, getting used to it, especially in contracts. In particular, the housing market, for example, they're looking at that sort of thing. So there is some development taking place at the moment. And it's very much encouraged by the local regulators now.
Yeah, it is good, right? Yeah, anybody want to ask any questions? Please put your hands up. Yeah. Yoheshwaran, you want to ask again?
No, I'm done. I just, yeah.
Yeah. Then you remove your hand there. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, anybody?
Dr. Siva, can I just advise you? If you want to put your hand up, you need to press Alt-Y. I had to Google it just now to find that out. So anyone who wants to put a hand up,
Krishnanandan. Yeah, Krishnanandan, you unmute your, yes. Krishnanandan, you unmute your mic and speak. Krishnanandan, you unmute. Okay, right. Now you can ask. Yes.
Yeah, I want to refer to very poor who try to develop an enterprise or self-employed with microfinances obtained from financial institutions but fail to pay back. Do they have a way out?
Krishna, let me respond to that. You know, with all due respect, sir, whether it is microfinance or whether it is major banking, this source of finance is typically based on public deposits. So when you're taking a public deposits and you're on-lending it to a microfinance, however poor the person is, I'm talking about regulated microfinance. There is a responsibility for the person who is lending also to make sure that they lend to the right person, and there's a responsibility for the person who is taking also to be responsible in paying it. With all due respect, there is no charity element in that. So we need to be very clear on that. But there are some institutions which are not doing microfinance through the formal basis. For this particular reason, there are some NGOs who are also getting into this space where they are looking at the sympathy factor and they are looking at that very poor factor and giving, probably with little or no expectation if there is a difficulty in paying back. Now that will depend on entirely the constitution and the DNA of that particular institution, whether it wants to go that way or not. But all I can say is, if it is on a mechanism which uses public funds, there has to be some responsibility.
Yes.
Do they have a way out?
Krishna, you got, yeah?
Yeah, it's all right.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody?
But maybe I will clarify one point.
Yeah.
But Krishna, I think one point which is very sad after 2009, I don't think it's happening now, was when the conflict finished, especially in the Vanni area. I am aware that you had a number of white goods manufacturers and distributors who rushed into the north and the Vanni, and they pushed a lot of this stuff from large LED televisions and God knows what else to these poor
Yes.
people who probably didn't realize that they have to repay back, that there was a contract. I think, you see, before that, a lot of these people were used to get money free as grants or donations. And I think there was a very probably a lack of education to these villagers, and there was a very bad experience. I mean, I went through the same process in tsunami in 2004. I collected money when I was running HNB, and some of my colleagues are, I think, here. We went to Panama in the East Coast, and we wanted to give some of the fisher folks who were affected some very low-cost loans for the registration of fishing boats. And we signed properly after educating. But what happened was, literally in the next village, there was a major Scandinavian NGO which had come and given free boats. Now, when they did that, those villagers came to these guys and said, why are you paying loans when we got it free? So immediately the mindset changed and the responsibility went away. So that, you see, when you are dealing with that segment of, you need to engage very deeply, explaining to them in a language they can understand where the responsibility is. That it's not charity that you have to pay back. You know, sometimes the lack of education also, innocently those people take it without realizing that they've got to pay back. And when the reprocessor comes, it becomes a very embarrassing social issue.
Yeah, if I am allowed, Yogeswaran here
Yes,
from
yes.
South Africa.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, sir, yes.
The post-COVID world, actually, COVID has changed everything. The way we live, do our work, and everything has changed. And Africa should be, the countries are encouraging their youth to go outward, not necessarily fully inward. I mean, inward we need, but I'm talking about external, outward encouragement of entrepreneurs to go into other places, so in which Africa is one of the great places, booming extremely well, plenty of land, mineral resources, and various other things, big market. And how do we encourage diaspora youth as well as Sri Lankan youth to adventure into various corners of the world? And this is why first of all, I'm talking about a knowledge economy, knowledge society, entrepreneurial society that is going around the world, because we are already blessed. We are already there. So how do we make that happen, that we go around the world and improve our 3 levels of the education, wealth, and the power status across the world?
Yes.
So
It is
Yoga,
very much here. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
okay, let me respond to that, Yoga. First of all,
Yes.
I am a firm believer at this moment in time, charity begins at home. At this moment in time, Yoga, unlike you living in South Africa, I live in Sri Lanka. And I can tell you, Sri Lanka needs youth. Sri Lanka needs people very much today, more than anybody else, right? So I think we need to first address that issue. But I want to address what you say in a slightly different perspective. Sri Lankan youth are very good adapters of technology, very good adapters of technology. So you see, today, as you quite rightly said, in a new normal for post-COVID environment, all you need is 4G or 5G, a mobile phone or a tab to connect with the world, right? And today, you can impart your knowledge to anyone in any part of the world from your house if you want to, as long as that connectivity is there. And I can tell you, we have some very successful Sri Lankan youngsters who are doing that today very successfully. And some of them are from the north, not only north, from all parts of the world, where they are developing technologies. And these technologies are highly scalable in any part of the world. Now, for example, that guy, the young couple, I think Miller, I don't think he's here today, Miller Rajendran and a couple of guys who run SenseMate. Now, that application can be downloaded by any farmer, however fertile in any part of the world. They can pay their subscription or license fee and they can apply. And by doing that, Miller can go to travel around the world while being in Vellavatta, while being in Chalkacheri. It doesn't matter. So, traveling around the world today can be done also virtually in the new norm, right? So that as long as you have the quest, and as long as these youngsters are encouraged to think freely and develop their platforms, which are happening, and I must say, our brethren in the diaspora are doing a great job in connecting and mentoring and encouraging and sharing knowledge as to how to develop. In doing that, one of the biggest things I think some of our guys outside are sharing is protecting intellectual property. When they develop this sort of thing, one of the biggest things which some of our guys, especially in the West Coast, have brought to Sri Lanka is teaching our local guys how to protect their whatever they develop. So in a simple manner, Yoga, I think physically Sri Lanka needs your youth, but that doesn't prevent our guys to export their knowledge to any part of the world virtually.
Yeah, why I'm saying that one is the scholarship, the study to a 3 months in a foreign country will bring the transformation that is required in their mind of entrepreneurship, the freedom from entanglement into religious language and all sort of conflict-prone mentality. You know, we are in a global world. Universalism is our thinking, and for that transformation, if it cannot happen from within, maybe we have to encourage young people to go to various countries, expose them for 3 months minimum study. By the time they come back, they will be different people, and
That is
we will
happening,
have
Yoga.
the
Yes,
required
yes, Yoga.
So
Yoga,
Yoga, that is
yes,
happening.
thanks.
That is
Yes,
happening.
okay,
I'll give you a good example.
Yes.
That's why I was suggesting, for people like you, as much as possible, connect with some of the infrastructure available in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. When I mentioned about the incubators in Colombo, now these guys have very good connections with accelerators in India, UK, parts of Europe, Singapore, and now latest also in Canada. Now I can tell you there is already Ryerson University in Toronto is coming here, and they're talking to some of our guys here in looking at some capacity building. So there are not only short-term scholarships, knowledge sharing partnerships available around the world today for guys to go out. Now, I think when I mentioned that thing about Nanosoft, when Nanosoft guys developed that first problem, they first were sent, I think for 1 month, they were sent either to UK or to Germany. I think they were sent to Germany because Germany had produced some of those branchless banks. So they were sent there by that particular on a scholarship, and then they were sent to Mumbai on an accelerator for 3 months to study how the Indian deployed it on their microfinance system. So they got some very good technical training and practical implementation. So then the guys came back here, came back to their hometown, much more wiser and smarter, and now they are deploying. So that sort of opportunity is there. But what the point is, we need to also try and connect with some of the local platforms which gives the pathway to go and connect with the rest of the world.
Yes, yes. Yes, good. Now, Vasi, you can, yeah.
Yeah, I
Vasi.
think mine is not a question, but here you can turn it into a question. I think fundamentally there are two things which are broken in our country, right? First is the structure when I call, I say sometime between husband and wife, or maybe committees and organizations. And the second thing is the communication between Puldono Sinhala. These are things we need to learn to improve so that we can become a success here on this.
Is it? Yeah, okay, now, yeah.
I may have missed out on the last part, but I think I gathered what he was trying to say. Well, if we are looking at language barrier, let me tell you, we are all human beings.
Yes.
At the end of the day, when we want to connect with somebody, however it's in broken Sinhalese or broken French or whatever it is, when the need comes, we connect Pasi. Right now, we speak about Sinhala and Tamil, we speak about the communication issue. But then I will ask that same question to our brothers. I think Yoga is there from Norway here today. If I ask Yoga, when he went from here, from Royal College, when he went to Oslo, how long did it take him to learn Norwegian? And why is he so fluent today? Because he has to survive there and to thrive there. So when the need comes, what about our brothers and sisters who are in Basel or Bern or Germany? They speak fluent French and Germany or Belgium or whatever it is, because when the need arises, whether they went from Jaffna, whether they went from Mathura, it doesn't matter. They are compelled to do so. Sometimes when we sit in our comfort zones, we are not pushed. So it is all to do with human attitudes, my friend.
Yes. Yes, anybody, yeah. First, your question is answered, I think, yeah? Yes,
Yes, yes, thank you.
yes, okay, good. Any question from audience? Yeah.
Time is, if the time is available, I will add one more.
Yes,
This
yes,
is about,
okay, yeah.
about the knowledge, the laboratories, because Sri Lanka is very good for scientific back office works. You mentioned about the data processing. Mathematics, statistical capacity is very good. Chemical, physics, material science capacities can be developed. So how do we become knowledge providers or research service providers for the greater world is another thing that we should work on. So this type of forum, maybe we'll have to have sub units with different agendas. So we continuously work on developing plans and how to implement those plans into different agendas is what probably we can. Yeah, but you also mentioned about the platform. Maybe let me get connected to those platforms and see what is that we can do. I come from a materials engineering background, so materials, laboratories are very essential, very much of good opportunities for our university extra environment also to be utilized fully in research capacity building and things like that. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
I fully agree with you. But one of the fundamental things I think we tend to get into a mess is we try to do this back office or this processing. And very often when we connect, maybe not necessarily with Europeans or white Anglo-Saxon, but when it comes to people from our part of the world, again, I'm not being disrespectful to anyone, try to get the cheapest possible solution at the cheapest possible cost, right? When that happens, you bring down the entire value proposition of knowledge, right? And I think, because I am a very firm believer and I'm practicing what I talk now. I'm a firm believer if Sri Lanka is to be an outsourcing or a knowledge sourcing location, it should not be based on price. It should be based on service and quality. And for that, you should be, see, if you are good, with all due respect, sir, where are you currently based in?
South Africa, yes.
So you are based in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
So today, in South Africa, for your knowledge, you will charge a particular price in Rand, right? You're not going to come bring your price down just because of somebody else, right? Because you're as good as any other South African. So my question is, but then when it comes to negotiating with somebody in India or Sri Lanka, we try to get that at 50% or 40%, right? And then you kill the animal. And I think the way forward for Sri Lanka is to create centers of excellence and not sweatshops. And I'm saying that I'm not here to promote myself, but at this late stage in my life, I have moved away from banking. And one of the things I have developed is I got into artificial intelligence and analytics, right? I now partner with one of the top 3 labs in the UK, right? But 80% of my business comes from overseas, only 20% locally. The reason behind that is I don't compromise on price. My solution is given maybe at 10% cheaper than what a guy who gets in pounds, because that is the dignity you give for the Sri Lankan data scientist or technology. Right? And that is the message I would like to give anybody who is plugging in. If you want to nurture these guys, give them what they are worth, and screw them or squeeze them for their knowledge and delivery, but don't mess them up with pricing. See, that is absolutely important.
Yes. Yes, it is good.
I
Yes,
hope
yes.
I made some sense there.
Yeah, it is true.
Yes.
And also, we'll have to move away from sending laborers to Middle East, and we'll have to become active. This is why I'm very much
Absolutely.
repeating my point. Women have to be given quality education so that they become technicians and researchers. And this is what we are, and why we allowed ourselves to go down to that low level of providing cheap labor to the Middle East and things like that.
There is always a life cycle, no, but the point is, one is never too late in life. One is never too late in life. But I think it also takes us, it takes us also to change our attitudes. See, when we go, not about the Middle East, I can tell you, in Sri Lanka, if you are a construction worker, maybe you will work for a couple of hours. When the sun gets to 35 degrees, you'll go under the shade. But then you get a few 100 dirhams or 1,000 dirhams and you go to the Middle East, and at 45 degrees, you are forced to work in the field, right? You'll happily work there. So this is the issue. In your own country, you're not, I call it sometimes the islander mentality.
Yeah.
So I think it also takes us, I think it takes something also internally to build our capacity. But I think the next generation is certainly, I think it's a few steps ahead of us,
That's true.
Siva,
Yes.
before you close, I want to just make one acknowledgement. I saw one of the very first people, one of the very first participants in this was my former mentor and literally a role model for me, Mr. Sami Pasupati. I know has been patiently logging in from 5 o'clock, and it must be literally almost 11 o'clock in the night for him. I'm so appreciative that he has taken time to log. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, now it's the time for
Thank you,
winding.
Tia. Yeah,
Huh?
Tia, it's been a pleasure and privilege listening to you, Tia.
I learned my basics from you, sir.
And it gives me great pride in listening to you. Thank you. God bless you.
Siva, can I briefly say something, Siva? Dr. Siva? Dr. Siva, can I say something briefly?
Yes. Briefly, quickly.
Tia, your presentation was excellent. I think you covered many things, agriculture, fisheries and all that. And I would like to see you more because you have so much experience. But again, it's going to take so much time to do those things practically. I'd like to thank you for your time today. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. The time is up now. Yeah, we have to wind up. Yeah, very excellent presentation, and you have actually cross section of factors, including from historic background to the case studies, and then come to the academia, and then to the quality and the pricing and other things. Very nice presentation, and the discussion is also focused on very concisely, very precisely on topics. And I have to thank Thiago and all the participants to conclude this session in a very timely manner and very good. Thank you everybody for connecting. On behalf of Managers Forum, we have to thank Managers Forum for organizing all this type of current topics. And thank you, Niranjan, for organizing this type of thing. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, folks. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Yes.